another absolute stunning sunset morning. I tell you what, I don't think there's a better feeling in the world than coming out and riding in weather like this and absolutely nailing your kit. I'd imagine every runner and every cyclist amongst you fully knows what it feels like when you're not sure what to wear, and then what you do wear is right on the button. From my toes to my fingers, I'm absolutely just the right temperature, not too hot, not too cold. Anyway, I come out for an easy couple of hours, very easy couple of hours, because I'm doing, I'm sure you're all familiar with now, the 16-8 fasting, which is super easy way of cutting down on calories because you're asleep for a majority of it. So between 7 at night and 11 in the morning, I don't have any calories, and it means that when you come out for an early morning easy ride or an easy run, it means that you're right in the right kind of zone to do a nice fat burning session if you keep it easy, as long as you don't do anything too excessive. If you do anything too excessive, you're going to bonk badly. Morning. So the idea is to keep this well and truly in zone 1, zone 2 at worst, and just come out and enjoy this amazing weather. It's absolutely glorious. So my friend Jenny left a comment in last week's video with Jimmy and Stefan talking about running shoes, about keeping a good pair of trainers back for racing, and I was like, yeah, I've got a pair of race shoes, or I did have at least a pair of flats that I used to keep for running on the special days. And obviously there might be a technical reason for that. They might be like super light running shoes that won't take a huge amount of mileage. I remember there was a pair of Saucony running shoes that we used to sell at the Tri Shop that were, you know, good for about 50 or 100 kilometers only, but they were so feather light, so you wouldn't want to train in those. You couldn't train in those because you'd be going through a pair every 3 or 4 days, really, isn't the sort of mileage that most people do. It got me thinking about this here bike, and this is probably about the 3rd most expensive item that I own after my house and my van. Not that I really own the house yet, but you get my drift. The house and the van are pretty vital ingredients to living, really, aren't they? Sadly, in terms of the van, but needs must and all. The bike is to some extent an extravagance. Certainly a bike of this value is an extravagance, but it was something we spent, and I say we because it was Bex that suggested getting this bike, and we had a little bit of money that was left to us, and Bex suggested getting myself something that I've always wanted to have. Ever since I was 8 or 9 years old, I've always wanted a bike like this, and I never have because, you know, I've had to buy drum kits and cymbals and things like that in my early career, and then you've got to buy nappies and baby food and put fuel in the car and things like that. The same thing everybody has to worry about, so you never have this luxury. Often when you get to sort of our age, my age, sort of 40s, 50s, start weirdly getting to the point where you can start to afford some things that you really love. And whilst it felt like an extravagance at the time, with the Grand Tour coming up last year, decided to buy this thing. I got it early last year, so I've had it exactly a year, and then I had to put a Di2 on it, which meant I didn't really ride it until March. And if you look at my mileage for last year, you can see that once I got it, I put the miles in, but then that's pretty obvious because I had to train for the Grand Tour, and then as soon as the Grand Tour was over, I didn't ride it very much because I was pretty much done with riding a bike for a while. But now we're back on it. So I did several thousand kilometers on this bike very, very quickly, and got my value out of it. But my point about the bike is that I haven't saved it for best. I've ridden it all the time, admittedly not for commuting, and certainly not for something like, you know, a cyclocross sort of environment. I wouldn't do something stupid as that. I've not shied away from riding this in torrential rain, mud, and all the rest of it, because I look after things like this. I take great care over them, because you look after them, they'll look after you, and it means a lot to me. It's a very important part of my life, this bike. And it got me thinking a little bit about some of my drum equipment as well. I own a couple of snare drums. Let me explain this from the office, it's better. What we have here are two vintage drums. This one here is a 1965 Ludwig 400. It's the equivalent of a Fender Stratocaster. So every good jobbing pro drummer should have one of these, whether they can get a vintage one or not. This one's from 1965, as I say, significant year for the Ludwig 400, because the previous year in 1964, Ringo had been seen playing one of these on the Ed Sullivan Show, and the production of these went mental. Everybody wanted one of these. So if you can get a pre-65, 364 version of one of these, you're onto a winner. A very expensive drum. This is a late 40s Slingerland Radio King. It's made from a 1/4 inch thick individual piece of maple that's steam bent by hand. The wood would have been seasoned properly. None of this kiln dried rubbish you get these days. Hand steamed. It's even got the pencil marks inside of the person that made this in the late 40s, I'd imagine. It was obviously just a post-war drum. When I got both of these drums, I'm guessing about 15 years ago now, I looked after them for best. Obviously I took care of them and only used them in the most exclusive conditions in the studio, where everything was controlled. But as I got a bit older, I started to realise that the people that made these drums, and I don't mean the companies, I mean the actual people that made these would have been hand manufactured, hand built, hand put together. They intended these to be played by musicians, to be heard and to make amazing art, and that's what I use them for in all but the most violent of gigs. And I have done some gigs where these wouldn't even be close to, because of the danger they might be in. I've used them on wedding gigs, movie soundtracks, tours, anything you can imagine. I've even taken to youth clubs to do presentations and things like that. So yeah, that's how I've changed, I guess, is that it's about thinking about the use of what they're supposed to be for. Should we be kind of saving things for best? Well, I'm guessing, my opinion, as long as you look after stuff, you should really use them for the intention they were created for. So I've always been a great believer in using stuff, you know? Not leaving it for best per se, unless of course it can't be used that much and you'd have to use it for best. But I think people put too much emphasis on trying to make things last a long time, like weeks, months, years or whatever. They don't think about the distance or whatever you might put into it. For example, a bike like this, if I didn't use it very often, good morning, if I didn't use it very often, this could last me 10, 15, 20 years if I only used it in the summer and I only used it in dry weather. Morning, Bristol South, morning, morning, morning. Or you could think of it another way and think about how many miles this bike's going to do. It's going to do probably the same amount of miles over those 15, 20 years as if I rode it all the time and rode it into the ground over 5 years. And I think I'd rather that. I think I'd rather use it and absolutely use it for what it was intended, rather than just keeping it on the wall looking shiny. And, well, what am I talking about? I do wash it and make it shiny and hang it on the wall. But in between then, just using it as much as I can. Because, some sort of context really, once upon a time, right, in a drum lesson at university, one of the students said to me, when you play the exercises, you play it like you're putting everything into it. And I sort of meant, I didn't really understand what they meant. They were saying, when you play as an exercise, you play it as if you're in a gig, you know, you give it everything. And I thought about this comment afterwards, and I was aware really that I think probably in the back of my mind is that classic comment of live every day like it's your last, because you're going to be right one day. And if that hasn't been brought to the forefront of my mind in the last 2 years, then, you know, I really don't know what the hell else the last couple of years has taught me. And exactly what the student said really. If I left uni having taught a drum lesson, thinking to myself, oh, I don't really care about these exercises. I've been playing these for 20 years, you know, and thinking about my tea and whatever. And then I walk outside and get hit by a bus and killed. And the last thing I wanted to go through my mind was that I hadn't really meant it when I played the drums the last time. I hadn't really given it my all, because that's been the most important thing over the last 30 years of my life, has been playing music with everything I've got. Good morning. And I think that's what the student had observed, and I think it's the same with using the equipment. I'd rather use the stuff that I love using and look after it than just leave it in a trophy cabinet, because it seems a bit of a shame. Think about that snare drum that was hand built in 1930s. Somebody had made that, and that could just be sat in someone's sort of cabinet for the last 50 years, not doing anything, looking beautiful, but it also sounds beautiful, and it seems a shame not to use it. So, what we have here is a 1965 Ludwig 400. It's the equivalent of the Strand of Fata.